Hey guys, Derek Rydall here. Just trying to get this streaming thing to work. I think it's working now. I just want to make sure I can see questions once I get started here. Just give me a second here. Um, Give me one second, guys. I think I think I see some people there. Okay, cool. So I want to welcome you here to this community discussion about making sense of a world gone mad. And I apologize if this looks different or is different. It's looking different on my computer right now than it normally does. I think Facebook made some changes. But I want to just start by taking a moment and taking a breath and just setting the tone. And we'll talk about why this is fundamentally the most important thing we can do when it comes to making sense in a world gone mad, whether it's the world far outside of us or the world around us and near us and within us. Just take a moment and take a nice breath into the back of your heart. And just let go of any residue of the past, even the past moment. Another breath into the front of your heart. As you release any concern for the future, even just the next moment. And a breath again into both the front and the back of your heart. And just let go of any attachment to the present conditions, any judgments, any pushing or pulling, any stories. Just give yourself permission to let it all go, just for this moment. Letting go of the tenses of time, feeling the tension fall off your shoulders, fall from your jaws, your chest, your stomach. And just be aware of the sound of my voice. Be aware of your breath. Be aware of any sensations. Be aware. That old, not old, but that word beware is really, what it really means is be aware. Be aware. And we take it one more step to be awareness itself. Notice that there is an I that is aware of your thoughts and sensations and emotions and sounds. Notice there's an I that is witnessing all of that. See if you can be aware of the I that is aware, that is awareness itself. And notice that because you can be aware of something, you are not that. You can be aware of sounds and sensations, thoughts and feelings, stories and judgments. But the I that is aware of that is not that. The I that I am is not the story that is being told in my mind, is not the sensations or emotions, all of which becomes projections and coagulated conditions. But because I am aware of all of this content in my consciousness, I can become aware that It is content. It is not who and what I am. It's like the garbage or the seaweed floating in the ocean. It is not the ocean. It's like the clouds and the birds and the storms moving through the sky. It is not the sky. I am the ocean. I am the sky. I am not the content in it. I am not a story. I am not a character. These arise. All of this arises from my consciousness. See if you can be aware. There is I, and there is that which arises in my field of awareness. There is story. There are characters. There are emotions and sensations. But I am beholding it and holding it, which means I am not it. I am the stillness out of which all activity arises. I am the formless or emptiness out of which all things or forms arise. I am the silence out of which all thought, all sound, all words arise. See if you can be aware of the I that is aware, that is awareness itself, consciousness itself. And to the degree that you are able to do that, in that moment, karma has been broken. A degree of dominion and real sovereignty and power has been restored. You have begun to reclaim dominion over the only thing you have control over, which is your attention. And so I am speaking a word of truth here, knowing that whatever needs to be spoken or heard, realized, released, or embraced, thought or done, so that life, this divine life, this perfect pattern of infinite potential, is planted in the soil of each individual, can emerge and blossom like never before, that is what is occurring here and only that. All of life is conspiring for our freedom, for our fulfillment, for our full self-expression. Just as all of life meets every seed in nature and turns it into what it is meant to be, the rose bush, the apple tree, the oak tree, turns it into the otter or the beaver that builds a dam, or the squirrel that plants acorns and nuts. That same life is conspiring to fulfill the seed of our destiny and potential, to fulfill itself as us, as instruments of more love, more light, more life, more truth, more beauty, more abundance, more wisdom, more genius, in a unique and unprecedented way. This is all that is happening always and in all ways. And it is now happening more consciously. We are now more receptive and available to it. And it is breaking through the strongholds of egoic structures and beliefs of separation, lack, limitation, and polarization. It is dissolving the illusion of otherness, the illusion of duality, the illusion of right and wrong, good and evil, the illusion that there is anything but one life. I am. It's happening now. With ease and with grace and with dignity. And I just give thanks for this. So grateful to come together as kindred souls and commune with our deeper nature so that it can begin to emerge and manifest a world that works for the highest good of all. And so it is. So, hey everybody, good to see you. All these awesome people, Jennifer and Dave and Sharon and is it Jacinta, Ro, Kathy, Marie, more of you, Robbie, Sylvain, Lydia, Brenda, Kay, Eileen, Letitia, Yanya, Pamela, Cheryl, all of you awesome people. And we're talking about making sense of a world gone mad. And I want to preface some things because I have to in a mad world. I have to be very clear the context that we are in a very powerful and important time of transformation and transition and Armageddon and apocalypse. The apocalypto, there's a breaking down of structures. The end of the world is nigh, and that just means the end of a world as we've known it, the end of the models and the paradigms. And this is happening in us individually if we're doing the work. Periodically there's a breakdown, there's a dying and a rebirth, and it happens also in areas of life, in institutions and systems, and it every once in a while happens on a global level, and that's happening now. And there's some very, very specific and important things that are occurring that are great and are good and that must be addressed, such as systemic racism, just like during the Me Too movement, the systemic misogyny and sexual harassment, and the echo and the fragments of the masculine structures and masculine individuals, men in particular, that oppress and take advantage of women, that had to break out and become loud and become noisy and become an agitator to get our attention. For whatever reason, as human beings, we do tend to need some form of pain or crisis to change. The crisis cracks us open. Just as certain things in the forest, like the jack pine, need the forest fire to crack open its seed pods, to melt this hard serotinous glue that releases its progeny and it burns open the canopy, it burns old trees down, it does a lot of work to allow growth to continue to happen. For whatever reason, in density, in 3D and in density, that's still required for many of us for real and revolutionary or evolutionary change. And so that's not bad. That's not a problem. That's part of the process. And we saw that with Me Too, and we saw that, and we're seeing that with the current police abuse and really a public lynching of an African American man. And of course that's not new. It's been going on for 400 years. But it's not the same. And I'm going to talk a little bit about what's different now and why it's important that we need to note the differences if we're going to truly evolve and not just merely have a flash point in history and then go back to a lot of business as usual, and the evolution will be much slower and much more painful. So that's a real issue, real with a little r, but real in the world that is being addressed now in a bigger way. And protesting is good, peaceful protesting, creating pressure on the powers that be, speaking truth, not to power, but to pseudo power, because the governments and the police and all that are not real power. They are a form of temporal power, and perhaps we'll talk about that too. But it's important, it's necessary, and it's happening. Just as if you're in a relationship and your partner is not hearing you, they're not listening, they're not hearing you over and over and over again, eventually you stomp your feet and you're like, God damn it, listen to me. Or it's like, you're sleeping on the couch, or I'm not cooking for you, or I'm not taking out the trash, or I'm done. Until you listen to me, I'm not taking another action. So sometimes that's required. When we haven't been able to use our voice in a moment by moment way, or they haven't been able to hear it, eventually we have to get loud. We have to, agitate the situation in order to get attention. So that's all a part of the process. Sometimes we even have to do it to ourselves, right? We want to change in a certain way. We want to build a new habit or do something different, and we keep doing the same thing. And sometimes we got to look in the mirror and just grab ourselves and shake ourselves and say, Derek, snap out of it. Wake up, dude. Come on, get with the program. It's like, okay, I got it. Right? Sometimes we have to protest ourselves, just shake us awake. So all of that is a part of the process. And I'm for that. I'm for peaceful protesting and peaceful speaking out of where the issue is and what needs to get done about it. Women's rights, civil rights, the rights of people of color, of Black people, of African Americans, of brown people, of Latino, Latinx, whatever the proper term is, everybody. But there's something else that occurs always when this happens, and occurs even more when it's already a fertile soil and a hotbed of, of, of very, very highly charged, polarized positions. And that is that very quickly, what is a valuable and necessary outrage and outburst and protest and a need to change the systems, it becomes politicized and polarized, and it becomes yet again the same problem. It becomes yet again good versus evil, me versus you, us versus them, this versus that. And what I want to talk about today is whenever something becomes something versus something, you've already lost the game. Now, you can be versus something, and through force, which is what we're already seeing now, through force, political force, personal force, individual force, you can create more rules, you can create more structures that force people to change through peer pressure, through political pressure, through social pressure. You force people. But that's not real change. And that energetic is planting new seeds of division and of conflict. You know, we saw it during the Me Too movement where it had to happen. It was important that it happens, and it still needs to be a part of the conversation. It's not done. The full liberation and sovereignty of women and the full honoring of the divine feminine by the masculine, that is not complete. We've just begun that journey. But what happened is very quickly, it got, and by the way, I'm not speaking politically here. I don't speak politically. I speak principally. I'm talking about principles. I'm talking about what are the principles for being in the world, but ultimately liberated from it, so that you can be a light, you can be a solution, not merely a problem solver that becomes part of the problem. As Einstein said, you cannot solve a problem at the level of thinking that created it. And unfortunately, what happens is a lot of the same thinking, i.e. division, divisiveness, me versus you, us versus them, good versus evil, that becomes what it's all about again. So we have the Me Too movement, and it's a vital and important conversation that requires real transformation and real change of some systemic issues. But what it quickly became was men are bad and women are victims. And is it true that there are some men that do really bad things? Absolutely. Is it true that there are women that have been victimized? Absolutely. So I want to, again, be very, very explicit so you don't jump to a reaction and not hear what I'm saying. I know many of you are with me. But the problem is that the minute you polarize, now it's toxic masculinity that is the bad guy. And we once again have the perpetrator and the perpetrated, the victim and the victimizer. As long as you have the consciousness of the good guy and the bad guy, or the victim and the victimizer, you will always, always have another victim and another victimizer. because that consciousness must continue to manifest. No amount of warring against the bad has ever stopped it. Ever. And it never will. This is why Jesus said, love your enemy, resist not evil, and the enemy is in your own household. Right? We didn't stop the white supremacy and the racism and the bigotry and the Nazism by merely destroying Hitler and his regime. It just went underground and it just spread out and it just became systemic in other ways. And then, we didn't even end slavery merely by killing a lot of people during a civil war. What we did was it then moved into the Jim Crow laws, and it moved into more systemic racism. It's a virus, and every time, like a dandelion, you attack it, and it goes poof, and it just spreads. And so the systemic racism spreads. It goes underground. It grows in the dark, and then it comes out over here and over here, and that energy of conflict and violence will break out again and again and again until and as individuals actually end the violence and the war within themselves. Period. No amount of force, whether it's political or military or social justice warrioring, no amount of that is going to solve the problem. Now, let me also be very clear. In the short term, you do need systems and structures and rules and laws that are increasingly in integrity with the higher truth, right? When Moses set the slaves free and they went to the promised land, which was just a desert, there was nothing there, that's why it was the promised land, they were crazy. This bunch of children, they didn't know how to be free. And so they're having sex with other people's wives, they're killing each other, they're stealing from each other. It's like, they're crazy. They're like children suddenly given all these freedoms. So the 10 Commandments was born. Don't kill, don't steal, don't lie, don't cheat. Basic rules to create structure so they don't destroy themselves while they are in the process of evolving in consciousness. And the same is true in society. We need the rules, we need the laws, we need structures, we need certain things in the meantime so that like changing laws around policing and all of that, it's valuable and it's necessary. But it's not the solution. That's what I want you to understand. That's what I want to speak to in you. There will be time for Q&A, by the way. Is that's a stopgap measure, right? You have to have enough structure so that we don't destroy ourselves while we're exploring our freedom and our sovereignty and discovering our true potential and evolving. Enough so that there's freedom to mess up, but not so much that we'll burn the store down or burn the laboratory down or kill ourselves or hurt ourselves or others badly. That's the purpose of rules and structures, right? But within that, the piece that's often missing in all of these conversations, except in very small areas, is okay, now we've got some rules, now we've got some safety, now we can have a level of freedom to explore. Now, what are you going to do with that? Because the next phase is now we have to evolve as individuals, right? Because if you don't have that conversation, because let's be honest, within the Me Too movement, within the world of misogyny and the judgment and the repression and oppression of women, are there any women that have ever risen above that? Of course, many women throughout all of history. In all the racism and bigotry of the world, have there been people of quote unquote minorities in color risen above that? Look at Nelson Mandela being put in prison unlawfully for 20 some years, coming out to become the president and end apartheid. So how and why were they able to do that? Again, that's not excusing the bigotry, the racism, the violence against man's humanity against man. Absolutely must be stopped, must have structures. That's step one. That's not the end game. Step two is, now let's understand what has occurred in the individuals who have been in oppression and repression and bigotry and lack and limitation and poverty and all odds against them, but nevertheless have risen above that to not only achieve their potential and become a leader or a light in some way, but actually with a heart full of love and compassion, not bitter and angry. How did they do that? How did they do that? How did Nelson Mandela do that? How did Martin Luther King do that? How did Rosa Parks do that? What was inside of them? How did the individuals that have risen out of all manner of terrible circumstances do that? That's the next step that we have to engage in. If all we're doing is, feeling bad and guilty because we're white, or feeling righteous and angry because we're black, or we're a woman, or whatever it's black against white now, it was women against men then, it's Christians against Protestants in Ireland, it's the Jews against the Palestinians over there, it's the one African tribe against another African tribe over there. It's the same story, right? The problem is fundamentally, we haven't laid the axe at the root. And the root is the tree of the knowledge of good and evil in the allegory of the Garden of Eden. The root is that we ate of the fruit of the belief in good and evil, the belief that there are two powers, the belief that we're separate from life, separate from love, separate from each other, and now we have to use a good power over a bad power, of course, the definition of which changes forever throughout history. And no matter how many times we use a good power or a God power or a spiritual power or a social power over a bad power, all we do is we plant more seeds of trees of good and evil. And we stay asleep. In the garden, Adam ate of the fruit of good and evil, and a great sleep fell upon them, and nowhere does it say they woke up. We're hallucinating. We're hallucinating a reality where there's good and evil, good and bad people that have to be stopped and destroyed, and then we turn it on ourselves. And that's fundamentally where I want to talk about today, because that's where the real war is. We're not in the world is in us. And we've turned the war on ourselves. And so all of the places in us that we think are bad, we fight with those places. We reject them. We repress them. We oppress them. We judge them. We deny them. We beat them up, right? That's where the real battle is going. That's where the real bigotry and the prejudice and the oppression of the feminine and the abuse and the shame and the guilt of the masculine. That's where that all is actually occurring. It's not happening out there. That's why we've never been able to permanently solve any problem, really, and have some significant peace. Now, things have gotten better over time. We have less war, we have less violence, there is much less racism and bigotry and prejudice if you look at the long arc of history. But that's not merely from political and social force. It's because of individuals and groups that have actually ended the war within themselves, that are represented by people like a Jesus or a Buddha or a Gandhi or a Martin Luther King Jr., etc. They're people that have ended the war within themselves to some degree, who then create that potential in the collective consciousness, which is a higher octave, and that lifts the race towards that higher frequency. That's how real evolution occurs. That's the only way it ever occurs. And the same is true with our life. No amount of beating ourselves or judging ourselves or shaming ourselves or proving ourselves or defending ourselves or protecting ourselves or fighting is ever going to make peace within ourselves. We must win the argument within ourselves. We must end the war within ourselves. This is why Jesus said, again, love your enemy, and the enemy is in your own household. Because that's where we're fighting. It's the same thing with the way we treat the planet. It's in the ecology of our consciousness that we are raping and plundering and not honoring. And so however we are in a relationship with life within us is ultimately the relationship we have with the world, with the planet, and with the people. That's it. It's no more or less. Now, if there's a rule that forces us to be a certain way, it doesn't change our relationship. It just changes the way we express it. Instead of being aggressive, we just become passive aggressive. Right? So it's very important that the way to deal with the world is to first understand that it's happening inside of you. And whatever pushes or pulls you is a projection of your own unintegrated shadows, right? If you find yourself hating on the president of the United States or whatever in your country, or you find yourself so triggered by what's going on in the world, afraid, enraged, judgy, blamey, you find yourself feeling guilty and ashamed for being white. You find yourself feeling so terribly victimized for being black or brown or whatever. Or in some part of the world for being Jewish or for being whatever. Again, it's the same issue. It's just different based on the culture or the period of history. It's very important to understand that the only power over you is the power in you. And this is part of the secret that the great hearts and minds and leaders throughout time have demonstrated to us. This is what Nelson Mandela discovered while he was imprisoned on the outside and became totally liberated on the inside, reclaimed himself as the captain of his soul, and why he went out and didn't put on tribunals to kill and execute all the bad guys, but forgiveness tribunals, and ended apartheid. This is the difference. This is the difference between a Malcolm X before his conversion or a Martin Luther King Jr., where it's all opposition and attack, which ultimately did not make real progress, or a Martin Luther King Jr. that ultimately did. Now, they all helped, but you saw what happened when Malcolm X had his transformation and became a man of peace. They didn't, the power of the ego in the form of the people, some of the people that were following him didn't like it. And the same thing with Martin Luther King Jr., the power of the forces that want to keep us divided. They will try to stop you. But I want you to understand it's not a force outside of you. It's the egoic force that has to keep this polarity of good and bad. That's the root of the tree, of the knowledge of good and evil, is this belief. And how it shows up in us is this belief that and this drive to always try to get more of the good or get rid of the bad. Craving and aversion is what Buddha called it. That constant drive and fight to get more good or to be more good, and also to get rid of the bad or to destroy the bad. It's the way we deal with our bodies. It's the way we deal with our minds and our hearts. It's the way we then ultimately end up dealing with others. And it's all a form of control and manipulation based on the false belief that there is a power of good and a power of bad. And there's not. There's one power. The power of life, the power of love, the power of truth, or if you will, the power of God. There's one power, one, and it is infinite and eternal. It's not in time and space. That's why there was something that existed before the Big Bang, because otherwise there couldn't have been a Big Bang. And the Big Bang created time and space. So this power is not limited by time and space. Therefore, it is infinite, it is eternal, and it is everywhere present or omnipresent, and it is all intelligence, all knowledge. There's one, and that one is the I that you touched in the beginning. And if you're going to take a stand, don't stand on this side or the other. Stand in the center. The only righteous stand is a stand in the center. It is not righteous to stand against. It is not righteous to be against this or against that. No, that's just more of the fruit of the poisonous tree. The only righteous stance is to stand in the center and to seek first and foremost a deeper connection with your true nature. Jesus called it the kingdom of heaven. Buddha called it nirvana. Lao Tzu called it the Tao. It doesn't matter what you call it. All that matters is that you call it forth and that you answer its call and you don't put it on hold or let it go to voicemail. And the way we stand in the center is by becoming more interested and identified with the witness and beginning to meet all these places in us that are angry, that are pissed off, that are scared, that are sad, that are righteous, that are furious, that are grieving, that are ashamed, that are guilty, and don't try to turn them into anything else, but meet them the way love would meet them. Love only sees its beloved. Evil is just lived backwards. It's just a part of you that has been misunderstood, mischaracterized. Whether it's called anger, fear, murderous, greedy, selfish, needy, raging, sick, ugly, it's just a part of you that has been misunderstood, misinterpreted, mischaracterized, and then judged and shamed and abused and rejected and tied in chains in the dungeon of your soul. And it's no wonder it's acting out, right? It's no wonder it's actually what's driving so much of you and ultimately so much of the world. But it's a part of you. And as you learn to embrace those parts, as you learn to really hear them and hold them and seek to understand them, and then to meet their true legitimate needs inside of you, one by one, all those fragmented pieces, all those lost children, all the sibling rivalry, all of that begins to retake its place in your heart. And you have a deep understanding and compassion and wisdom for those parts of you. And you can hold those parts of you. And guess what now? You can now hold the way they appear in the world. You're not triggered by it. And now you are actually a channel for real righteousness, for real wisdom, for real truth and real light. And you may speak firmly or fiercely, but it won't be judgment. It'll be love. It'll be a sword of truth seeking to set someone free, not seeking to cut their head off. And you will notice you have more space. You have more compassion and empathy for yourself, and more life can move through you. And now life can use you and claim more territory for your message and your work and your love and your gifts, because you're now no longer part of the problem. But as long as you're fighting something, judging, attacking, shaming, blaming, ussing, and theming someone, you're part of the problem. You are at the level of thinking that caused the problem. And even if temporarily you cut the head off of the weed, it's going to spread and it's going to grow back. And it's going to grow not only out there, but it's going to grow in here. And your garden will become infested with more weeds. And they will choke the life of your true seed of purpose and potential. And so we must tend to our own garden. There's a lot of stuff going on out there that is seeking to pressure you and snatch your mind for its purposes. Right? Think about this. Black lives matter and all lives matter. They're both the truth. But do you notice how now you must pick a side? And if and if you say Black Lives Matter, you've got the right side if you're on the left. And if you pick All Lives Matter, you're on the wrong side. You're trying to say Black lives don't matter enough. Do you see the insanity of this? Yes, we are focusing on one aspect where the virus is strongest, where at least strongest in the media. Because let's also be aware that 250,000 people died last year at the hands of medical malpractice. We're not out protesting that. Tens of thousands died last year in auto accidents. 100,000 people die of poverty and starvation around the world. Where are those protests? So it's all a matter of who's controlling our focus. And again, 100% we need to focus and deal with the racism and the bigotry and the police violence. If you are a person of color, you know the pain and the fear of what it's like, especially to grow up in a neighborhood and in an area where you can be just stopped because you're walking. You walk in a store and just because you're Black, people are following you. I understand. I mean, I don't personally experience it, but I have many friends and my own teachers and mentors who lived that way and grew up in that way. And I was brought up in largely a very diverse, but highly African American church. And my God, the godfather of my children, is an African American. So I know the pain, at least empathetically. So it must be dealt with. But I'm trying to open up, and for women too, with the Me Too movement, very, very painful, very, very important, must be dealt with. But I want you as individuals that I believe are seeking to be truth seekers, truth seers, truth teachers, and have a more expanded awareness, to notice the game that's going on. To notice that. Don't get caught. Don't get pressured to choose a side. There are no sides on a round earth, and there are no sides in your heart or in consciousness or in truth. There are no sides in a world that is free. Don't be pressured. Stand in your center. Be a stand for the truth that includes the all. And that's a courageous act and a courageous stance. Be discerning, be empathetic, but realize there are many, many, many more abuses and deaths and murders and tragedies, things going on that are actually statistically and in pure quantity much, much worse than what's going on merely with the policing. I want to put it in context. Must be dealt with. Critical. But from an expanded awareness to be an individual that sees more clearly, it's important to know that what's also happening is the ego of right and wrong, of good and bad, of we must have an enemy to defeat, and we must find our righteous stance as the good versus the bad. That's the ego pattern. It's snatching that now, and it's turning it into that political theater and social warrior theater. Don't get caught by it. It's happening also with conspiracy theories that's been going on for the last few months. We're in a very fertile time where it's dangerous, and I said beware, be aware, because we've all been broken down to a degree. Ego has lost a degree of control and power, and we have to be very mindful that there's a fragility in us and in a lot of people. And in those times, this is where the strongest or the most powerful or the most forceful ideas tend to plant their seeds and sow more division in the guise of the Great Awakening, in the guise of, doing the right thing. This is how some of the, the greatest fascist things have risen up. This is how some of the worst socialism has risen up. This is how really, really bad outcomes take place when we get caught, and it temporarily cuts off the head of the weed, and the real work isn't done. The real war isn't won. The real conflict isn't addressed. And the real war and the real conflict and the most important place to heal is in ourselves. Period. And again, that's not mutually exclusive. You can heal yourself and also go be part of a peaceful protest. You can heal yourself and deal with your own enemies and judgments and conflicts and work on new legislation. It's not an either or. But I want you to make sure, I want to encourage you to understand that the most important work, and I am saying the most important, is heal thyself, know thyself. Above the Oracle of Delphi, it didn't say create better legislation. It said know thyself. When you have a deeper understanding is when you can have a more powerful inner standing, and then you can take a more powerful and centered and grounded outer standing. And that's when you become truly outstanding. You stand out. You rise above the noise. You become a light. You become a leader. But if you get caught and you get pulled and you get pressured by the memes of the day, and you are not vigilant enough to see they are seeking to create more of the same exact problem. Good versus evil, us versus them, right versus wrong, good and bad, pick a side, silence is violence, all of these memes. They may even be coming from sincere places, but they are still contain the seed of the poisonous tree of separation and duality. And therefore, as the saying goes, if you are wrong in mind, you can even do all the right things and it will still turn out wrong. But if you get right in mind, meaning you find your center, you find your peace, you deal with your own stuff so that you don't act it out on the world, then you can even do some of the wrong things and it will still turn out right. Martin Luther King Jr. wasn't perfect. Nelson Mandela wasn't perfect. They had their stuff. If you know the real story, they did some bad stuff. They had their stuff. They were people. But because there was so much of a focus on really working within their own heart and their own spirit and doing the work, it was okay. It didn't prevent the progress that they were meant to make. And the same is true for you. I'm not saying you got to be perfect. I'm not saying you have to have all your shit together. I'm just saying you have to recognize it. You have to be aware of it. You have to recognize that the war is within you. And the only place you can win it is within you. And when we come together to hold each other while we're seeking to love and hold ourselves, that's when we create the beloved community where the healing and the evolution can happen that much quicker. And that's why I'm bringing you together today and talking about this. So that's what I have to say for now, but I want to open this up to questions. That was a lot longer than I thought. I guess I had a lot more to say. But I want to open this up to questions. And let's just see if there's any... so just post questions that you may have about this. I don't think there's a way for me to bring you on live unless I was using Zoom. But post your questions in the chat box, and I'll scroll through here real quick, or in the comment box. Post what you're feeling and be honest. Don't just post a question. Post what this is bringing up in you. Maybe it's triggering you. Maybe you're like, yeah, that's easy for you to say, Mr. White Privilege. Post it. Post whatever's coming up, because whatever's coming up in this frequency is being met with love, is being met with grace. And so post what it's triggering in you, feedback, pushback. Obviously not merely to be just destructive or merely critical, but seek to want to know yourself, seek to want to heal and to become and to discover your wholeness, but post whatever this is bringing up. Questions, concerns, how do you deal with such and such a person in this situation? How do I apply this to my own personal life, to my own personal work? Because we have a lot going on. We have a pandemic still. As places are opening back up, we're seeing the cases rise again. But then again, some people are saying it's all a conspiracy. It's not real. It's hard to know what's true, isn't it? Right? The doctors say one thing and now they're saying another. The CDC says one thing and now it's saying another. And there's a secret dark cabal that's controlling it all. It's, Trump is going to save the world. Trump is going to destroy the world. There's a lot going on. And so it's important to know, how do we deal with that? Well, I can tell you the way you don't deal with it is by thinking you're going to find the truth out there. You're not. Even if you find some facts, you'll never find the truth. Because you can only find the truth in here. That's it. You may find some stories, and a lot of good storytellers are out there right now that are weaving just enough facts with a lot of fabrication to create propaganda that makes their case on all sides, pretty much. And so if you think you're going to find the truth that way, you're going to be looking forever. I'm not saying don't be informed. Be very, very vigilant. Be very, very mindful. Be mindful that although I understand conspiracy was made up by the government to stop people from sharing the truth, there are real conspiracies. There are also conspiracy theories running rampant about COVID, about the Great Awakening, about Trump being the savior, about secret pedophile rings run by Hollywood, whatever. There's a lot going on. And there are facts in there that are accurate. And then there's a lot of projection and a lot of fear and a lot of opinion and a lot of fabrication mixed in. Again, on all sides. And so it's very disconcerting and it's very scary when you know that most of what you see is only half-truths or blatant lies or a combination of fabric woven with just enough truth to make it seem like verisimilitude. It's very disconcerting. You feel like out of control. And this is what I really want you to again understand. The truth, the power, the salvation, the freedom, everything you need to be all you were created to be, the guidance, the direction, everything can only be found ultimately in you. You have a direct link to the truth and the truth as it expresses through you. And so what this is creating is a condition where you cannot trust what's going on out there. And so you have to learn to trust what's going on inside. You have to learn to understand what's going on inside. You have to learn to find a place in you where you find certainty and confidence and peace and clarity and guidance. This is why it's happening. It's like learning to fly a plane. You have to go through instrument flying where they blindfold you, cover the windshield or whatever, so you cannot see out. You have to only look at the instruments. You have to fly by the dashboard, not by what your eyes can see, because you'll be caught in clouds sometimes and you won't have any idea where you are, what's up or down, right or left. And so the same is happening for us now. We're being asked to train in flying by our inner dashboard. But we got to understand the instrument panel. We got to understand what it means. What do those signals mean in us? Where do they come from? What is the message? Who am I? Why am I? What am I? Where am I? These are the things we have to get clear on. If you spend all the time that some of you spend going down rabbit holes of conspiracy theories and this, that, and the other, and getting caught up in all the fighting, you spent that on knowing yourself, now we're talking freedom, baby. Now we're talking revolution, spiritual revolution. So that's what we're talking about today. So let me look through here. I saw a bunch of stuff coming through. I want to try to answer some of these. All right. There are no sides in the world that is free. Oh yeah, I said that. Okay. Looks like suffering is everywhere, like Buddha called it dukkha. Really sad to experience it and to see it around. It is. And what you want to do is be with the sadness, let it break your heart open. Let it break your heart open. Let it melt away the armor. All the ways we've protected ourselves from letting love in and letting more love out. And then let it reveal to you the stories you're telling yourself about the world or about you or about others, so that you can notice, am I telling myself the truth? Or am I merely experiencing my limited map of reality and identity? And now I can turn that over to something deeper within me or higher within me and ask, what's the true story? Help me to see this clearly, God or Buddha. Reinterpret this for me. Higher power, oversoul. Let me see more than I want to fix, change, control, heal, or manipulate anyone or anything. I want to know the truth that makes me free. I want to see clearly. So let that emotion and reaction lead you to an ultimately deeper seeing, a great unveiling. Love and lessons are the key real takeaway of life. Yes. Heal thyself, know thyself. Do the right thing versus adversities. I have to live from the inside out. We are all brothers and sisters. Let's love each other. Yes, and remember, it's hard to love each other, right? If we don't learn to love ourselves. Or, like how are you at loving your child or your spouse or your brother, sister, mother, father when they're being jerks, when they're criticizing you? How loving are you towards yourself when you mess up, when you don't do what you say you're going to do, when you make a mistake again, when you fail, when you feel like a loser? Can you love your inner loser? Or do you try to turn your loser into a winner, which is not love? It's actually a form of violence. That's a part of you. And when you meet her, him, understand them, meet their deeper need, you discover that it's actually a beneficial quality. So we must learn to love ourselves. Then we'll be better able to love each other. And we must be willing to be in conversation with each other with nuance, folks. Not black and white, right and wrong. If you don't agree with this, you're part of the problem. Bullshit. We must not get pulled into that. We must have the courage, first with ourselves, to have honest and authentic and nuanced conversations, and then with each other. Because it is not as simple as black and white. And I mean that literally and metaphorically. But that takes courage. And it's rare in a society gone mad with social media and memes and just media. So we have to be the change we want to see in the world. And that's why we're talking here today and having a conscious conversation, because the conscious conversation is what converts, is what creates the conversion. And we must have freedom of speech, meaning we must feel free to talk to ourselves and to talk to each other without attack, and then be willing to enter into a conversation, into a dialogue, seeking the deeper or higher truth that serves the highest good. What you said helped me understand why I haven't felt the charge, anger, grief that many are feeling. Yet I have an amazing experience or connection with a young African American man recently. Helps me realize how much we are connected. Beautiful. While labeling, classifying is biologically engraved in humans, it is only spiritual layer of intelligence and intervention that cannot let biology play its bias, BS, and bully. Right, I see what you're saying, Jaya, is that it is a part of our, it's an evolutionary artifact of our biology and of just of our ability to adapt and evolve, which is our ability to judge and label good and bad, right and wrong. You know, saber-toothed cat, dangerous. Don't make that think that's your kitty. Otherwise, it's going to eat you, and we're not going to make it as a human race. That enemy, that tribe over there, actually has malicious intention. That's not your friend right now. So stay a safe distance. Otherwise, you're dead. You know, this place is dry and has no good food. This is not a good place to live. So we develop that ability. We map out our reality because the brain has been wired that way evolutionarily. And that's valid and that's necessary. Just as a child learns, they learn eventually not to go into the street. They learn to notice what that speeding car, what that dot in the distance is. It's a speeding car towards them. They learn that the stove is hot. Don't put your finger on it. They learn what to put in their mouth and what not, etc. It's a mapping out, and it's an essential, basic survival mechanism to keep us intact long enough to survive as a species, and then long enough to survive as a baby, as a child. That gets repeated in the child cycle. It's the same cycle as our evolutionary ancestors. But then there's an evolution that has to occur where we have to learn to override that basic fundamental law of humanness, which is merely survival. Because we're not merely human. We are something more than human. Call it spiritual beings. And our first rule of spiritual beingness is not survival. It's greater and grander expression of life. It's the opposite of survival. And so, but in order to do that in density and in form, we have to learn how to navigate form so that we can bring the light and the spiritual beingness into human form, into an experience with structures where you can do damage and be in danger. So it's not that we cut that off completely. We just learn to put it in its rightful place. How would you suggest we honor and support the impassioned Black Lives Matter person when we see that there's a much bigger picture? Well, first of all, step one is, and hey, Larry, you want to notice where it's acting upon you, where it's coming from in you. More than our action that we take is where it's coming from. That's what determines what is the seed of that action. Is it guilt? Is it pain? Is it shame? Is it fear? Is it pressure? Is it my heart's just breaking open? Where's it coming from? And it would do us well to take a little more time, always when we feel activated, to get clear, really clear. I would even say, if you have the choice in all of your life, not just in this case, never act until you are certain where you're acting from. And until you are certain that the seed of that action is actually the seed of the outcome that you really want. So if I'm coming from a place of seeing love and seeing unity, and I'm not trying to save the world or save any people or save any political agenda, I'm serving what's emerging. Because behind Black Lives Matter and All Lives Matter is what's emerging is a consciousness of individuality that loves, that truly supports, that is truly at peace within themselves. An individual that's no longer at war within themselves, that is no longer divided within themselves. We're not even individuals yet, because individual means undivided. We're fragments. And so there's true individuality that's seeking to emerge. And that means both having full capacity of our sovereignty and our full ability to create unity without ever sacrificing our sovereignty or without ever breaking unity. That is the kind of individual that is seeking to emerge. So as we're seeking to take action, we have to check and see, how is this serving that in me first and foremost? Because if you become more of a true individual, where you're no longer, you're not pushed or pulled by anybody's agenda, quote unquote, good or bad, all lives matter, Black lives matter, I don't care about any of that. I do not move unless I'm moved by the divine, by the truth. I do not speak unless I'm spoken through. I am one with the one, and that is my guide. That is my teacher. That is my master. Not any of that going on out there. That's what it begins to feel like as an individual. And then you from there, you eventually move because you are being used. Now, if we don't always have the time to do that. There's something that has to be dealt with, right? And you do your best. And then you assess after, and then you do your work. And then you put yourself back out there, and then you notice what occurs, and then you reassess, and you go back out there. You know, it's like learning to walk. We learn to walk by falling. And all that walking is that we eventually learn to control our falling forward enough that we're walking. So we're gonna keep falling and hitting our head and breaking stuff. But as long as we catch ourselves at some point and we dust ourselves off and we get clear, okay, this time let me try right foot first, we'll grow. But in terms of how to deal with Black Lives Matter versus, I really want to just position the potential that that's actually the wrong question. Because I just want you to sit with that. And because it's really about, how do I be more a purer, clearer instrument of life and of love and of truth according to my unique design and purpose? That's really the only question we ever need to answer, right? That's when Jesus said, stop worrying about everything that's going on out there, what you're going to eat, what you're going to clothe, what's going to happen tomorrow. Stop it. Seek first the kingdom of heaven within you and its righteousness, not the world's rightness, but that rightness within you. And all of those things will begin to be worked out. They become the byproduct. Right action, right use of technologies and tools, that just naturally begins to blossom as you're connected to your seed and to your true nature. Okay, I hope that helps. I think I just answered that one, Kathy. How to get that out there, starting with our own truth and love. How would love answer the question? I'm not sure which question, unless you're referring to Larry. Now, to be clear, as I said earlier on, there's always the value and importance of discernment. I'm sharing this with you guys because I've set the context and you've showed up. But if I'm sitting there with my friend who's Black or African American or brown, who's gone through this thing or is experiencing this and their heart is broken or they're angry, I'm not going to say any of this to them. I'm just going to hold them. I'm just going to listen to them. I'm just going to love them. I'm just going to agree with how fucking shitty it is. I'm going to be like, this sucks. I'm so sorry. What can I do to help? I'm just going to be there for that individual, right? And then if and when there's a space of really being met, there may be a moment where it expands, where something more is pulled out. But I'm in the role right now of teacher, and so and all that I have to teach is principle based on experience of dealing with many, many difficult things in my life. Physical challenges, financial challenges, family challenges, being beat up and bullied, my son dying. I mean, all kinds of terrible, tragic, difficult, not the exact same, but underlying all challenges, there are principles. And that's what I'm teaching, is bringing you back to principle, not necessarily giving you a script for how to speak to your liberal or Republican or Black friend or Asian friend specifically. Except when you live from the way that we're talking about and are mostly about knowing how to speak to yourself, knowing how to listen and hear and hold and love all the parts within you, naturally, you will know how to hold others and speak to them. Not a script, not a talking point, but as human to human, as being to being, as heart to heart. How do you deal with the racism that comes up within yourself? Yeah, that's, there's the shadow of the bigot or the racist, right? And even if you don't think you have it at all, you probably still do, right? If you're walking down a street and there's a nice white guy in a nice suit, do you feel nervous if you're a white person? If you're walking down the street and there's a big black guy in a nice suit too, but he's a big black guy, do you get a little nervous? So you want to notice. It's subtle sometimes, but that's a shadow, and we want to embrace it, and we want to deal with it. At root, racism, bigotry, whatever it is, it's a signal. It's a pattern of what we don't understand. Either number one, the mystery, and it scares us. And when we used to make maps and we hadn't mapped out the world, what did we put where we didn't know what was there? Dragons. There be dragons, right? So that's part of what is underneath bigotry and racism and prejudice and xenophobia. But then there's also usually specific shadows, right? So for example, just think of what are the core judgments that a racist has against a black person. They're specific, right? They're lazy, or they're stupid, or they're whatever. We also have light shadows. They're great athletes, they're great musicians. But even that is a shadow. If we're thinking they have something we don't and we're jealous of them, or if we think they're something less, if we think they're lazy and stupid, if that's how our racism shows up, that's our shadow. That's because we're lazy and stupid and we haven't embraced that part of ourselves. Because we've been told or given a message that it's bad. And so racism has this one underlying element, but it also has these specific shadows. So wherever you feel you are judging somebody, you're being prejudiced. Whether you're judging them because they're too successful or they're greedy or selfish or black or white or whatever, it's all just a version of judgment and prejudice. But if it's just black or brown or Asian or white that is your judgment, you want to notice what is it about that race that you judge. And then that's where you pull out the specific shadows. And I can't go through the shadow process right now, but if you go to my site, under the free resources, you can get a shadow meditation that can take you through once you identify what those judgments are. And then once you embrace those within yourself, you won't have that judgment anymore. You'll have compassion, you'll have love, and that trigger will go away. All right. We've been brainwashed for a long time. Yeah, we've been hypnotized. And we're all under hypnotic spells. And the granddaddy of them all is the hypnotic spell that of good and evil, of good and bad, of two powers, or of separation from life itself. That's the granddaddy or grandmother or whatever of hypnotic spells. It's the one that all the greatest masters have tried to free us from. Um, let's see. So joy. As a black person born in America, I felt so much hurt and rage as a result of recent events. And as a spiritual person, I felt ashamed for the things I wanted to do. I had to do exactly what you are saying, and it's been hard, so hard, but I'm finding it, excuse me, in moments, in moment to moment surrender. Thank you, brother, for speaking this ultimate truth, so necessary and healing for my soul. God bless you and all of us. Beautiful, Joy. That's the work, my dear. And and let me also be clear, feeling all your feelings is essential too. We cannot skip over the emotion, the energy in motion, or that just becomes more repression or spiritual bypass, or it acts out in other ways. We have to let ourselves feel. Our only fear really is a fear of feeling. And we have to let the energy in motion move through us. And then we'll notice that, rage, pound stuff, do it in a way that's safe to you and others, obviously. Don't go destroying storefronts and looting, but but let that energy move and cry and wail. And also know that this experience is triggering a lot of trauma in us that is trauma of a lifetime that hasn't been dealt with. So there's a powerful opportunity of catharsis in this for a lot of people. All the places we've felt victimized and abused and we've been traumatized and or where we've been the victimizer. That's all getting triggered in a lot of people. So you got to feel those feelings. You got to let the energy move. And then you'll notice there's a beginning of a clearing, but it's not about merely venting, and it's not about indulging in our feelings. It's not about, feeling the feeling and making up more stories about the feelings. It's just being with the energy, letting it move, right? When my son died very recently, I had to let myself feel the agony, the terrible, terrible agony, the rage. I wanted to burn the world down. And I still notice flickers of that. And I just let it move through. And so I had to let it move through while I was on the floor wailing and screaming and pounding and all of that. There was a part of me that was holding me and witnessing me through it all. So as best you can, allow there to remain a part of you that's holding you and witnessing you, speaking to all of you, and let yourself feel. Because there's a lot of you that haven't yet gone there. You jumped to some concept, or you jumped into action, or you jumped into spiritual work, and you haven't let yourself, your heart break open and let the energy of pain or fear or rage or whatever, grief, move through you. So thank you, Joy, for doing the real work. It's lifting all of us. Ricardo, I'm a gay Latino guy and experienced racism and made fun of, but I've evolved and learned from those experiences to be a better human being and transcend division. I hope that we can all realize we are equal, that all lives matter, and there is no sides. Yes, thank you, Ricardo. My son was gay and had to deal with a lot of shit, and we did as a family as well. So it's just another version, right? Another thing that many people don't understand. And I'm just very grateful that you've done the work too, my brother, and continue to do the work and be a light. Roderick, as a white immigrant, I've struggled with how to react to this situation. This helps. I do believe that we are all in the human race and should work together to solve the issues. The question I have is whether we are actually in the final days of the United States as we know them. It's an interesting question. I don't know. I mean, on one level, I don't know, and on another deeper level, I don't care. Because ultimately, the government is upon God's shoulders. But yes, there's some very clear systemic problems. Part of the seeds that this country was built on was on racism, on slavery and also on misogyny and but nobody's perfect. Let's also recognize the actual transcendent truths that were downloaded through the founding fathers and probably mothers, um, are real. The principles of freedom and sovereignty. And it's amazing and a miracle what America has been capable of doing. And we're still very much in our infancy in terms of what's possible to bring to fruition the founding principles of democracy, of true freedom, of true sovereignty in unity and in community, which you can trace back these principles to Jesus's teachings and Buddha's teachings, and they eventually became these divine principles. What do they look like in a society? But they were being downloaded through and practiced by very flawed and imperfect people, as they often are. And so we have to remember we are all continuously the founding fathers and mothers of our country, of our life, and of the world. It didn't end back then, right? It's still just beginning. And so that's why, again, we don't want to try to save the world or even the country. We want to keep serving what's emerging, right? We want to serve what's emerging, which is really what the founding fathers were really trying to do. And then eventually, once something emerges, all of our focus becomes about saving it. And that's how you end up with an military industrialized complex. You move from perfection to projection and perception and projection, and you end in protection. You just lock it down, and all the energy is to serve it, to save it, rather. And we stop serving what's emerging, and all we're doing is saving what we're seeing. And that's why Jesus also said, if you try to save your life, you'll lose it, but if you lose your life, you'll find it. That there's always a new life trying to be born. And if we are focused on just trying to hold on, and don't let it change, and go back to the good old days, and all of that is, we're just trying to keep a carcass alive. So something new is trying to emerge. And I don't know, and because the founding principles are spiritual principles, if we continue to remember that and focus on that, and continue to spread the principles, not merely, the talking points and the taking of sides, then I think that we can move into a whole new generation, a whole new evolution of what democracy is truly meant to look like. And then that can spread again around the world in a bigger way. Okay. Sorry, I got some other stuff coming up. It's about inclusion, not exclusion. The last sermon in the movie Chocolat comes to mind, to embrace our humanity in each other. So is it our main role only to look within ourselves? It's our primary role. Meaning, we gotta, if you're building a house and you don't first put the focus on what is the blueprint, and then next put the focus on what is the foundation, then you're building a house that's not going to stand. And so you got to get in touch with the blueprint, and you got to make sure you have a solid foundation. And ideally, you want to let life or God or the divine within you build the house. Otherwise, most of our labor is in vain, because we're just building and rebuilding based on ego, based on previous patterns. But no, absolutely, we then take action. We want to be in the world. We want to be good citizens. We want to be loving parents and leaders and conscious activists and healers. The real activist is one who is an activator, because they're carrying the frequency of the result, right? They're carrying the frequency of the world that works. And so when they go in and speak or act, it up levels the frequency. The wounded activists are the ones that are carrying the wounded frequency. They're carrying the frequency of the wound. And so all they do is tend to perpetuate the wound. So we have to make sure we're not merely perpetuating our wounds and our traumas, that we have a solid foundation. We know where we're coming from. Yeah, so Rim is saying, most of us, there's so much racism and genocide and killing, and we feel alone, no power to make change, with a sense of perturbations. Um, yeah, I get it. And all of that is where we are called to go within and find our power, where we feel powerless. We want to embrace the powerless part because there's a deep mystical wisdom, because ultimately we are powerless. Remember, I said in the meditation, the only control we have is our attention. The power is within us, but it's not a power we can make happen. It's a power we have to make welcome. It's a wisdom we cannot make happen, but a wisdom we can make welcome. When we work to connect with that place within us where our real power lies, where our real wisdom lies, we are used as instruments and channels of good in the world. And we are empowered, and we claim more territory for love and for light and for truth. But it's not coming from ourself personally. Just as the branch that bears witness to the tree with the fruit and the flowers, it's not coming from the branch, it's coming through the branch. And where we feel that way, that's our call to go within and rediscover and reclaim our power. And it's work. The way is straight and narrow, and few there be that walk it. But I know you guys are feeling that call. Ambreen, love what I'm saying. I've been saying this in the context of COVID, so I feel affirmed and empowered in the perspective question. In the context of what you are explaining, Derek. Oops, there's no question there. You look like you started to ask a question, but then there's no question. So you guys should read through. There's a lot of great comments and things. Yeah, Christine is saying the kingdom of heaven is within. All the confusion out there is helping humanity find the guidance within and learn to trust that guidance. It's a process, not an event. Yeah, just seeing through my questions. Would you explain this good? Oh, here's the question. Would you explain the good and evil polarity in terms of the biblical story about Satan being banished from the Garden of Eden and vowing to lead people astray? Yeah, so the one thing to understand about, what time is it, by the way? I gotta make sure. Okay. The one thing about the Bible is a combination of actual historical events, allegorical events, meaning didn't actually occur, it's an allegory, or myth, which didn't actually occur, but is actually more true than it's easier to see the truth in a myth or in an allegory or in a parable. It's true in principle, but not necessarily true in historical occurrence. So it's a combination of these things, and a combination of books, and a combination of stories, that if you understand it and read it with spiritual discernment, it's telling a journey of the evolution of human consciousness. And it's telling a journey of how consciousness emerges as individual being. That's what the Bible is fundamentally telling us. And and so what the Garden of Eden parable or allegory is telling us, it's telling us a lot of things, and obviously we could do a whole multiple talks on it, but it's doing a couple things. It's a parable or allegory that's trying to explain or articulate how the problem of evil and the suffering of man and woman, the suffering could ever occur when it says in the beginning there's God, and God made all that was made, and the Word was with God, and the Word and made all that was made, and whatever the Word didn't make or whatever God didn't make was never made, and God saw it all and named it good. So if it's all a world of God and it's all good, what happened? What happened? How is that possible? How do we explain evil? How do we explain suffering? And so it's trying to say that the belief of good and bad, the belief in two powers, the sense of being separate from God, from our innocence, is what began to create the hypnotic spell that we fell asleep under. As I said, it says he ate of the knowledge or ate of the fruit. There was a great sleep. It doesn't ever say they woke up. That we didn't leave the garden. We didn't leave innocence. We haven't left heaven. We haven't left the Father's house. The prodigal son, the story of the prodigal son is another version of the Garden of Eden parable where he takes his inheritance and says, I'm good, I'm out. And he goes and tries to live a life of his own. And eventually he spends all of his money, loses his inheritance, is broke, hits rock bottom, and is like, Dad, can I come home? So it's trying to tell us about a journey of how we separated, or at least because we are consciousness, we have the ability to develop perceptions because we are literally individualized expressions of the divine mind, made in the image and likeness of God. Doesn't mean God's a man because we look like men and women. It means we have the faculty of metacognition. We have the ability to think about what we're thinking about. We have self-awareness. But because of that, we can perceive any type of perception we put our attention on. And as we were evolving in forms, we could begin to perceive what you would call separation of things. It was just a perception, and initially we were aware, I'm this galactic or cosmic consciousness, and I'm having a perception of these two things are separate. This material body is separate from that. But eventually that perception of separation grew to such an extent that we became lost in our form. We became lost in material perception, lost in a personal sense of a self apart from life itself. And that's what occurred. And the Garden of Eden is trying to tell us how that happened and how we created polarities and dualities. And then Satan actually comes from a deeper term that means crazy thinking or crazy thought. Sin actually is an archery term. It means to miss the mark. It's a mistake. But as this energy of duality, this energy of good and evil grew, it gained a sense of momentum, a sense of a power, like a force itself, like a magnetic pull. And that's what then became termed the devil or Satan. Later on, it was called carnal mind. It's a coagulation of collective belief of separation. And it's in the collective consciousness because we're all one in the consciousness. So it has a pull. The beliefs are like thought viruses that are part of our experience, and they tempt us. That belief shows up and it says, you're bad, or they're bad, or you don't have enough, or you're not enough. That's the devil. That's that belief system tempting you to believe you're something other than divine. It's not a person. It's not an entity. It's not an actual being separate from God. It's a belief system. But of itself, it has no power. It only gets empowered when you believe it. Every time you believe it, you bite the apple and you give it more power. You go deeper into that intoxicated sleep. But because God is God, life is eternal life, there isn't infinite life and anything else. There isn't an infinite God or infinite life or infinite love and bad. It's impossible. This is one party where there is no plus one, right? So So when you understand and actually have a discovery of that mystically, you see there never was a devil. It's what was named, and it wasn't even what was initially meant, by the way, by the initial mystics that described it. It was how they were trying to describe this energy, this blob of belief that had built up an energetic that was operating in human consciousness to make us believe in lack, limitation, separation, disease, all of that. And and now the second really quick second part is the fall from Eden and the belief in good and evil and the journey back home again to the Father, Mother, God's house, or back to innocence or back to Eden is also a necessary journey, because that's how we learn to be fully cosmic conscious beings while playing in density. So that on the other end, we can create magnificent forms as human biologies and all the magnificence there is as absolutely conscious beings without, again, losing ourselves in our forms. So that's kind of the nutshell of it. That was a lot there, but hopefully that was interesting to some of you. Okay. But it's important because this is all at the root of what you're seeing in the world. What you're seeing in the world is just the playing of consciousness of the drama of duality and separation over and over and over again. That's why no amount of trying to solve that problem is going to solve it, because all you're doing is giving more energy to the illusion. All you're doing is biting the apple and just eating more apples off the tree, right? Or fruit, or whatever the fruit is. Don't want to give apple a bad name, but apple's a bad name. But that's why it never solves the problem. You're just moving around deck chairs on the Titanic. You're just creating illusions, more illusions on top of illusions. So, and we're all at different levels, and we're all doing our best in everything you do. And when you're doing your best within the dream of human experience, does create progress. But for those of you that hear and understand, you have a deeper work to do. Let's see here. Yeah, Jalia reminding us apocalypse is Greek for the revealing. Yeah, it's revealing what's hidden. Exactly. Let's see. Again, read these comments, guys. There's some really good stuff in here. As Khalil Gibran wrote, pain is the breaking of the shell that encompasses your understanding. Good stuff. As I allow myself to just feel the pain, which, yes, hurts unbelievably, I find small slivers of love creep into the cracks where the pain pours out. Yes, indeed. Beautiful, Joy. Thank you for sharing that. Let's see. Wow. Is it Bear? How can I help my daughter make peace with being raped? First of all, just there is no words I can say right now. That kind of experience requires a depth of holding. And the first thing you can definitely, that's what I mean with something like that. It's not like I can give you some words or a lecture. It's about how you hold her and let her feel held and let her feel all of her feelings, the rage, the powerlessness, the grief, even the shame. And as she's ready, and if she's ready, then you can help her to begin to look at the story she might be creating and help her to tell a new story. When terrible things happen to us, tragedies, rape, murder, death, terrible disease, we always want to say, what's the meaning of this? And while there is a deeper esoteric meaning to everything. We may or may never find out. What's more important is, how can I let this give my life more meaning? How can I be stronger because of this? How can I activate more of my power? How can I be more loving, more compassionate to myself, to others? How can I use this to make my life better? Now, that might seem like a weird question when something terrible has happened, but the questions we ask give us the answers we seek. So the question is the quest you're on. If you ask, how can I use this to make my life better? And you meditate on that and you contemplate on that, you will get answers that will make your life better. If you ask questions like, why me? Why did this happen to me? What do I have to do to get back at them? Or we make statements like, I'm ruined, I'm broken, it's never going to work out. Then we also will get that result in our life. So, but again, this isn't necessarily what you say to somebody if it's fresh. That's why I wanted to contextualize this. A great deal of healing can be had by holding and by listening. And for you, noticing what it's triggering in you. If it's making you see her as a victim, if it's making you fear for her, if it's making you fear for you, if it's making you enraged, ashamed, or whatever, that's where you get an opportunity to do one of the greatest acts of love, which is work on yourself so that you get clearer, so that you can hold her without trigger, without trying to fix her or change her or heal her. Now you become a field of healing for her. That's always the most powerful thing we can do, is when we're holding anyone or anything, is again, making sure we're holding those parts of ourselves. Yeah, somebody's saying about not watching the news over and over, protect basically our own consciousness. Let's see here. We're going to just go a few more minutes here. It's not over. Yeah, so Tammy's saying, hallelujah, no, it's not all black and white, and we should not allow immediate interest to manipulate us. What is happening today is the result and culmination of hundreds of years of history, sad and tragic as it may be. Revisionism and denial of the past is nothing less than censorship and a violation of free speech. Blanket criminalization of our police forces is no better. We all need to face up and find a better way forward. We need to think, to reflect. Have we learned nothing from the past? Yeah, exactly. And this is the difficult balance we have to strike, which didn't used to be so difficult in terms of conversation, but we've created a cancel culture. We've created a culture that's so highly charged, so just stuffed full of media, social media, and memes, wall to wall, 24/7, where people's minds have very little space left. And there's no brake pad anymore. It's just metal against metal. And instant trigger, instant cancel, instant doxing, instant attacking, instant shaming. There's no space. Lisa Nichols, some of you may know, a great thought leader, a beautiful woman, African-American woman, just woman, beautiful woman and teacher. She was silent and she got attacked. But she was like, I had to get my shit together, people. Like, silence is not violence. Denial is, or seeing like what those cops did when Derek Chauvin was killing that guy, that silence was violence. But us taking the space and taking a step back and getting still and getting silent to be clear where we're coming from, that is the opposite of violence. That is peacemaking. And that is creating a space where something real and new can emerge. So, and so we have to find a way to have space in us so we can have the conversations that actually include both sides of the picture, the left and the right, the black and the white, the masculine and the feminine, the police officers and the people that feel perpetrated upon, or just the people. Whatever it is, the military and, the government. This is what diplomacy is, the US government with another government. We must have enough space and consciousness to have a conscious, nuanced conversation, because the solution is absolutely never binary. It's an understanding. And when people feel heard, they feel held. And when they feel held, they start to hear and feel what's really going on in them. And there's finally real space for real meeting and real understanding. And again, I'm not going to get political here to give all the perspectives and point of views of both sides, but it would do us good to be informed ourselves. And where we get triggered by it, again, I listen to both sides, left, right, black, white, police, this, this theorist, this economist, this philosopher, this politician. I allow myself to have a well-rounded listening, seeking to hear the truth principles, seeking to hear how this is just another piece in the whole, because there's only one whole and we're all pieces in it. All the countries are like all the organs of the body. All the institutions are like the systems of the body. The left wing and the right wing, you got to have two wings to fly, people. We just haven't understood. There's no fight here. There's just a misunderstanding. We haven't really sought to understand the oppositional points of view, because within us, we're at war with them, you see. That's why it comes back to that. But we have to be able to discover that within ourselves, and we have to be able to have conversations with others as a way to explore and discover those polarities and those positionalities and where we're at war with them, and seek a deeper understanding. Because then, as I said, we have a deeper understanding, we have a better inner standing, and then we can stand on the outside strong and clear together. All right, I'll just see if I'll take one more or so here, and then we'll wrap this up. And keep commenting if you're liking this, what you're getting from this, what your takeaways are. This will help me know to do another call and training and talk and support you in what's going on right now and beyond. Yeah, some person saying about most of the media and all that is propaganda, and it's true. There's truth in there. There's facts in there. They're just then skewed and spun to serve a particular positionality. The same was true, by the way, in the holy books. The Bible is full of propaganda. It's positioned from the political and the historical and the cultural needs of the times. But if you know how to read beneath the propaganda, the dogma, the doctrine, and the cultural idioms, you can discover the principles. And that's the same. As you learn to read yourself this way and see beneath your layers, you'll begin to hear the truth amidst the propaganda and the dogma and the doctrine and all the nonsense going on. You'll be able to see that. You'll be able to read the spiritual truths, the principles in all the history and all the mystery and all the messes. You'll get the message that's in the messes. Let's see. Joy's asking, saying, I know we're called to love, and I know I'm a spiritual warrior. I'm too connected to the warrior and not enough to the lover. How to unharden my heart? Yeah, I mean, the process I just said about dealing with the shadow parts. And I would imagine some things you never want to be seen as weak or a burden or dependent or a victim. So those are all shadows of the feminine. I don't mean women, I mean the feminine principle. So you want to embrace more of the shadowy parts of the feminine principle within you. And that tends to be like weak, victim, burden, dependent. All those that probably make you cringe. And what'll happen is it'll soften you. It'll make you humble, vulnerable. It'll make you realize you don't have the answers. It'll make you realize you are powerless. That's another one, powerless, helpless. The truth is that we are powerless and helpless. We don't have the answers. And that's the truth of our humanness. The truth of our divinity is that we are infinitely powerful and infinitely knowledgeable. But the two have to live together. And that's what happens when you embrace the parts of you that you don't want to admit or that you've been trying to compensate. If you got the message that if you're vulnerable and you're going to get attacked, or it was bad to be weak or bad to be a victim, then you're going to be working overtime to become the opposite. And you've developed that. You've developed the spiritual warrior. And now you have to develop and embrace the other side of you. And you won't become weak. You'll become a greater channel of even more real spiritual power. And you'll begin to discover that spiritual power is never a power over or against anything, because it's the only power there is. So there's nothing for it to fight, nothing for it to overcome, nothing for it to heal or fix. I'm just power. I'm just life itself. And so there's a lot of great insights in there for you. Craig is saying, we need to learn how to deal directly with root causes, which is why things like racism have become systemic. Yep. And we desperately need to recognize group responsibility for sin. So what I think you're saying there is group responsibility, like as a nation, we bear a collective sin, a collective grievous error for slavery, for the genocide of Native Americans, et cetera, et cetera. Or as white people, we have a certain collective sin of racism or bigotry. Or as men, we have a certain collective sin of misogyny and oppression of women and all that. So this is the old oppression of women and all that. So this is the old adage of the sins of the father are passed on. And it's also where we get genetics from. The idea that we carry the genetics of our ancestors. But it's not actually true. It's not actually true. It's a belief, and therefore we bear the burden of that belief. The actual truth is that we are already innocent. But when we do our individual work, we find the places within us where we find the misogyny in us, or the racism in us, or the bigotry in us, or whatever. But the danger of this idea of collective sin or collective responsibility is that it is what leads to when it's not understood spiritually, but when it's grabbed and used to create social engineering and to also perpetrate a sense of collective shame. So it's like, you're white, you have privilege, you should feel terrible about this. And you see, you see this celebrity video that went out recently where everybody's saying, I take responsibility, and it's kind of laughable. It's clear they're reading off scripts, they're reading talking points. Just get on and talk honestly about how you personally deal with this. Don't create some scripted talking points to virtue signal to everybody that you're taking responsibility. So there's a lot of things that happen when we put collectivism, socialism occurs from that. Every individual is a sovereign being and bears no responsibility for what anybody else has done. That's the fundamental truth. And you want to start there. And then, as I said, as things impact you, as you notice that you've done something, or that you believe something, or you find yourself reacting in some way, then by all means. And as you also understand, as you grow and expand in consciousness, you stop working as much on your personal stuff And you are working on the collective. But the danger with jumping to the collective is, again, it can become a bypass. Or again, it gets snatched by the ego and just becomes another way you bludgeon yourself with shame, with guilt. And that's not going to serve you. You can never shame or guilt yourself into freedom or into love. Never. And you can never shame or guilt a collective into love at all. It never works. It's never worked, and it never will. It actually will backfire, as we even see is happening right now. So there's different levels, though, right? Because as I said, all the racism and bigotry is part of this collective belief system that isn't even personal. I'll say that one last thing also, that Gandhi said, love the sin or hate the sin. That the problem is not personal. There is no person who's personally responsible for racism or bigotry or anything. They are an individual that has gotten hooked by this belief system or pattern. That's all. And that includes you. That doesn't mean we condone it. That doesn't mean we don't stop it. That doesn't mean we don't work to change it. But we have to begin to remember, as Jesus said, forgive them for they know not what they do. They've been hooked. They've been hypnotized by a pattern. It's a pattern. It's not a person. It's not personal. And the more you can understand that, the more you can unhook yourself, forgive yourself, and unhook others and forgive them, and love them back to themselves, and approach them without them feeling judged and attacked, and help them to get unhooked where they want to. Okay? I think we got to wrap it up here. The questions are, let's see. I mean, there's a lot of different angles on the same thing, but I think we've pretty much covered it. Again, post any other questions you have or any other comments or feedback you have, and I will look over it and then think about another call and to continue this conversation. It's an important one. And continue to come back and share what you're getting from it, what you've gotten from it, what you're doing about it, how you're taking this work home for yourself. And I think we'll wrap it up there. 11:32. Yeah, this is a good long time for a training. I love and appreciate you all. Just take some time today to just create a little space, just a little space for yourself, a little space from the noise. Just love yourself a little more today. Just reward and honor yourself for taking the time today to be with yourself and to be with all of us. I know that I honor you. And until next time, remember to live authentically, love unconditionally, and follow your destiny. Take care, everybody.